Hello everyone. This lecture provides a brief generalistic overview of the African American client. Please view some of the other resources listed in the module overview, as well as the specific section of your assigned chapter of this week. The demographics of the African American clients. The term African American includes a diverse array of peoples, including African Americans born in this country, Africans, and the individuals from the West Indies and Central and South America. The 2000 census numbered African Americans in the United States at right over 12% of the population. Since the time of slavery, they have been this country's largest minority until the 2000 census, when they were passed by Latinos by just over 12.5% of the population. African Americans increased to 12.6% of the population, and by 2010 are projected to level off at 13% by mid-century. They are the most widely dispersed ethnic group in the United States, both geographically and economically. In 1997, for example, 55% lived in the South, 36% in the Northeast and Midwest, and 9% in the West. Although most African Americans are descendants of families who have been in the United States since the time of slavery, immigration has been slowly increasing over the last 2 decades, leading to increasing levels of linguistic and cultural diversity. Immigrants from former British Caribbean colonies bring with them a mixture of African and British customs, and those from former Spanish, French, and Dutch colonies do the same. In 1980, only 3% were foreign-born. By 1998, the figure had risen to 5%, with most of the increase coming from immigration from the Caribbean. Projections predict increasing immigration from sub-Saharan Africa. Previous immigration from Africa was primarily from Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, and Morocco. Such diversity warns providers against assuming the existence of a typical African American family, since the geographic diversity is so vast. Here are some family and cultural values. 4 factors that have shaped African American experience and culture include the African legacy, rich in culture, customs, and achievements, the history of slavery and deliberate attempt to destroy the core and soul of the people, racism and discrimination, and ongoing efforts to continue the psychological and economic subjugation started during slavery, a victim system and process by which individuals and communities are denied access to the instruments of development and advancement. Black slaves brought with them a rich amalgam of cultures from West Africa, and according to a specific author, Hillard in 1995, rather than eradicate African culture and consciousness, slavery actually served to preserve it. Aspects of an African world view still infuse African American life: a deep religion and spirituality, cooperation and interdependence, and a oneness with nature. According to another author, Marshall, 2002, enslavement added a complex of coarse values and attitudes. Emphasis on resistance, freedom, self-determination, and education were amongst some of those. African culture also contributes a tradition of strong family structure in which extended families and close-knit kinship system were the basis for larger tribal groupings. According to researchers who have worked to adapt family interventions practices to the cultural realities of African American families, there are 3 critical strategies. An understanding that cultural context of the family, view differences in family dynamics as adaptive mechanism and strengths. Develop practices that take into account the needs, cultural dynamic, and style of African American culture. An author in 1972 identified the following 3 factors as positive strengths to build upon: kinship bond, role flexibility, as well as religion. I'll briefly go over each one. Kinship bond. Most African American families are embedded in complex kinship networks of blood and non-related individuals. One author suggests that he found a pattern of kinship-based exchange networks linking multiple domestic units, elastic household boundaries, and a lifelong bond to 3-generation households as typical. Another author points to a series of uncles, aunties, boyfriends, older brothers and sisters, big mamas, deacons, preachers, and others who operate in and out of the Black home. Such extended patterns and the multiple resources that they provide must be acknowledged and worked by family social workers, therapists, or counselors as a legitimate locus of intervention. Key family members must be identified and included in any treatment planning or intervention plans, even if they do not fit the traditional definition of family. It is critical that they play a significant role in the family system. Extended kinship bonds also suggest the usefulness of working with subgroups of the extended family and including only those who are directly relevant to a particular issue. It may also be necessary to schedule family sessions in the home to include key figures who cannot or will not visit clinics. Again, entering a home like seeking information should be done with sensitivity in light of past abuses of the welfare system against poor families. Role flexibility. Role flexibility within the African American family, like extended kinship bonds, is highly adaptive for coping with the stresses of oppression and socioeconomic ills. It is most evident in the greater role diversity found among African American men and women, as well as in the extent of unique family roles, such as parental child. The father's precarious economic position, coupled with the need for African American females to work outside the home, often lead to extensive role reversals and flexibility in child rearing and household responsibilities. These circumstances have led researchers to suggest that, as a result, African American children may not learn as rigid distinctions between male and female roles as their white counterparts. Researchers caution against assuming the absence of a male role model when the father has abandoned the family. Given the variety of extended family figures, someone often emerges to fill this role. While the African American male has been viewed as peripheral, the African American female often is forced to assume responsibilities well beyond those typically taken by white women, and has frequently been mislabeled as overly dominant. African American couples are in fact often more egalitarian than their white counterparts. One author, for example, found that more often than whites, Black males and females grew up with the expectation that both men and women will work. Another author offers some interesting insight into the dynamics between African American males and females. Discord tends to be dealt with indirectly rather than through direct confrontation. Solutions to long-term disharmony are typically informal, and long periods of separation may occur without the thought of divorce. African American couples tend to remain together for life, often for the sake of the children, and typically seek therapy for child-focused issues rather than the marital dissatisfaction. In spite of possible ill treatment by the husband, African American women tend to resist the dissolution of a relationship. One author suggests that this may be a result of 3 factors: greater empathy for the husband's frustration in a racist society, awareness of the extent to which they outnumber black males, strong religious orientation that teaches tolerance and suffering. Economic demands and oppressive forces have, in addition, created unique roles in the African American family. Included are the parental child, which involves parental responsibilities allocated to an older child when there are many young children to attend to, or when both parents are absent from the home for a considerable amount of time. And the extended generational system of parenting in which the parent role is shared and distributed across several generations living within the home. It is important to emphasize that such adaptive strategies within the African American family, while clearly a potential positive force, can in themselves become sources of problems that require intervention. This occurs when their intended functions become distorted, overused, or rigidified. According to one author, if the mother's role is overemphasized, it can become the pathway for all interactions within the family. This requires children to relate primarily to her moods and wishes rather than to their own needs. The result is emotional fusion of the children within the mother. Parental children can be forced to take upon the responsibilities well beyond those which they are capable of, and at the expense of necessary peer group interactions. Shared parenting in the multi-generational family can become highly chaotic or a source of open conflict and dispute. Such patterns may, in fact, be necessary for family survival. An intervention goal should be to set it back to its purposeful course so that it can once again function as intended. And lastly, religion. Religion is an extremely important factor in the life of the African American community and provides a valuable source of social connection as well as self-esteem and relief in times of stress. African American families seeking help from mental health agencies or social services agencies may be unconnected to church networks, and clients may dichotomize problems as appropriate for discussion either with a minister or with mental health professionals. For clients with elaborate church connections, such networks can represent valuable resources. This might include seeking necessary information from religious leaders, calling on the network for help and resources during times of crisis, or including ministers as significant others in therapy or as counselors. The trauma of slavery and the long history of racism have shaped and defined the African American experience in the United States. It is impossible to understand the African American psyche without keeping these two events clearly in mind: slavery and racism. One author states the facts of slavery quite succinctly. From 1619 until slavery ended officially in 1865, 10 to 15 million Africans were brought here, and another 30 to 35 million died in transport. The magnitude is staggering and even difficult to conceive. But that is not even the full story. There was also the systematic destruction of African culture and identity by the slavers and slave masters, the tearing apart of families, the creation of myths of inferiority and subhuman status to justify what was being done, and an entire nation that benefited greatly, economically and socially, from this cruel institution. Racism has since replaced slavery as a vehicle for the continued exploitation of African Americans, as well as justification for continuing to deny them the equality granted by the U.S. Constitution. As a people, they survived, grew strong, and fashioned a new culture in America, but they continue to this day to pay an awesome price for the color of their skin for which they are judged. Another author goes as far as to argue that the United States is functionally two nations, black and white, and that there is an enormous disparity in the access that these two groups have to the resources and benefits of this rich nation. Hacker in 1992. The long list of statistical inequities, from average slaveries to unemployment to salaries, from incarceration figures to education levels, from teen pregnancies to poverty statistics, all are very staggering. For example, poverty rates amongst African American is almost 3 times that of whites. Life expectancy is 6 years shorter, and infant mortality rates are twice those of whites, Asians, and or Latinos. African American households receive the lowest annual median income of $25,100, and African American men experience the highest rate of unemployment among ethnic minorities. African Americans have in turn been the point men for the struggle that has been waged against the inequality and social injustice that continues to exist in this country. Through the civil rights and various other social movements, they have been the voice of conscience in America, not allowing it to forget the grave injustices that are still very much alive. Another author suggests they have been the center of racial attention, and all other oppressed groups have learned from and modeled their fight after those of African Americans. But it is little wonder, as our guests, who are African American clients, will eventually understand the importance that it is to have cultural competence services and to have individuals who will not judge based on the color of their skin.